I don't usually feel bad for rich people, but this Ballerina Farms article was so crazy. The story starts on a weird note because even Hannah Nealman, who is behind Ballerina Farms, telling the story of how she met her husband was already deranged. She said that they met and she didn't really want to go on a date with him. And then 6 months later, she was going to be on a flight and she told him, like, yeah, I'm flying to New York on this day, whatever. And he goes, that's so crazy. We're on the same flight. And she was like, oh my God, that's wild. And they were sitting right next to each other. Then it turns out his dad owns the airline and he had pulled strings to make sure he was on her flight and sitting directly next to her. They tell this like it's a meet cute. Already a little bit weird. Whatever. So then they get to New York. She's like, I want to date for at least a year so I can finish school before I get married. He says, no, that's not going to work. So a month later, they're engaged. 2 months later, they're married. And 3 months after that, she's pregnant. And she literally said that she didn't want to be pregnant because she knew she would have to sacrifice her entire dancing career. She was the only Juilliard graduate in modern history to be pregnant at graduation. And then she's talking about like the sacrifices they made. And the journalist's like, oh, what sacrifices did Daniel make? And she's like, his career. And then Daniel's like, but actually this is always like moving to bumfuck Utah and like living on this like ranch is actually like always exactly what I wanted to do. And so the journalist's kind of like, huh, all right. And it just gets weirder and weirder. There's so much else to like talk about here. Like she says that they're co-CEOs, but she has no nanny because he doesn't want that. She has no childcare because he doesn't want that. So she does all the cooking, like everything by herself for 8 kids. And they also like are very Mormon and they're a lot more open about their Mormon views in private in the conversation with this journalist than they are in public. But they talked about how like, of course they don't believe in, you know, and so they have babies like unplanned, like whenever that happens. And so she's had 8 kids so far, which is crazy. And he talks about how she gets so exhausted that she faints sometimes because she's dealing with these 8 kids and now this entire like influencer career in addition to the whole like farm family situation that they have going on. And then the last thing that was like the saddest part to me is she talks all the time about how she gets all her births completely natural, like no pain meds, like no epidural. And then she says to the journalist, she's like, well, I did have one epidural one time with Martha because she was a 10-pound baby and Daniel wasn't there. And the journalist was like, oh, how was that? And she was like, it was really great. Like, that's so, it's sad. It's actually just sad. It's so sad. I know she thinks she's like girl bossing and happy, I think, but also like clearly she's so exhausted. Clearly this is not like what she wanted to be. She gave up her dreams of Juilliard and now she just like has 8 kids and like is exhausted all the time and is fainting. I don't know. It just makes me, I feel sad for her.
And I guess I'll just miss her, even though she isn't even really gone. Things are just different ever since she cut her blue hair off.
That man intentionally ruined that girl's life, and y'all can sit up on here and say Ballerina Farm loves her life, Ballerina Farm is happy with her life. Okay, maybe she is. It's not about her though, because it's never been about her. It's about him and what he did and the principle. Juilliard accepts 12 women into its program every year. And it's not just amateur hour up there pookie of people applying. And she got a full ride. And he deliberately interfered intentionally with her life. People say she chose it and, you know, she chose to go with him. From what I've learned about Mormons, it really doesn't seem like women have much of a choice in any part of their life. And even when they think they do, they have this patriarchal structure and system ingrained deep inside their brain. You don't just break out of that. And she didn't even want him, y'all. She didn't even want him. That's the crazy part. And then he pulled some strings at JetBlue to sit next to her. You're a freak. You're a freak. It's disgusting. It's diabolical. And that man absolutely demolished her life. And I hope she is happy. She says she's happy or whatever, but it really isn't about that. It never has been, obviously. It just makes me sick in the deepest core of me. Like, it makes me feel ill. I just can't take the people on here being like, oh, she chose it and y'all are doing too much. No, babe. That man is evil, but go on.
Imagine you're married to the heir to $1 billion fortune. Your husband's family is loaded. You have given this man multiple children. And it's your birthday, and all you really want are tickets to Greece.
Tickets to Greece. A hat I can wear in Greece.
What's that a hat?
It's not. Oh, my A-game friend!
Eggs in it.
Great, now you can gather eggs. You're welcome.
Thanks, honey.
You know what she wants. You can give her what she wants, and you give her something that she could do more chores with. I just saw an article about this content creator. Her name is Ballerina Farm. She has like millions of followers here on TikTok. And in the interview, she talks about how she basically works herself into exhaustion. Taking care of, I think they got 6 or 7 kids, if I'm not mistaken. No nanny. They only have a maid that comes in once a week. She is so exhausted that sometimes she has to lay in bed for a whole week. He can't even give her for her birthday rest. The gift of rest. A man that only sees you in terms of your labor should be a red flag. I don't care if you're cooking and cleaning for him in a 1-bedroom shack or if you're cooking and cleaning for him in a 10-bedroom mansion. It should still be a red flag. You are more than chores. You are more than labor. You are a person with thoughts and dreams and goals and aspirations outside of being a wife, outside of being a mother, and outside of what you can do for other people.
With everyone talking about ballerina farms right now, I just want to say that I'm really confused by the amount of people who are just kind of like overlooking the fact that her husband was controlling her medical decisions, for the fact that she wasn't able to become a ballerina, which, like, don't get me wrong, is still sad, but I'm confused by it. Like, seriously, this woman inadvertently admitted that while she was giving birth for the 8th time to a 10-pound baby, mind you, she was still having to consider her husband's feelings over her own physical pain. She was having to be so aware of his controlling and abusive behaviors that she, while in the middle of labor, had to wait until he left the room to secretly ask a nurse for an epidural. She had to secretly ask a nurse for pain relief while giving birth. Like, seriously, what type of behavior could a man show that would make his own wife feel like she cannot tell him that she simply wanted some comfort while doing one of the most painful things that someone can really ever do in their lives, not only while it's happening, but also however long after the fact, I'm pretty sure years after the fact, where they're able to see that not only did it not negatively affect the child, but the wife, the mother, also views it as a positive experience that she's glad that she took. Because when your behavior is something that makes your own wife feel like she has to wait until you're not even around just to mention, that's not a positive behavior, and that's not a healthy relationship. Especially when we're talking about trying to control someone else's bodily autonomy and medical decisions. And while yes, her not being able to pursue her dream of wanting to be a ballerina is very sad, I think it's a little bit strange how people are focusing more on that than like the actual textbook signs of an abusive relationship, you know? Especially when so many people are overlooking those blatant red flags to blame her for all of this, like leaving a 10-year abusive relationship with someone you have 8 kids with is easy, even if you're well off. I will say though that she is definitely fully responsible for how she markets her life online to young impressionable people. We just also need to keep into consideration that at this point, if she were to try to market her life in any other way, it could potentially physically endanger the lives of her and her children, depending on how deep the abuse goes behind the scenes. And it would also mean that she would have to admit the situation that she's gotten herself into fully to herself, which is understandably a very difficult thing for anyone in an abusive relationship to admit. Like, I've been in an abusive relationship before, definitely not to this extent in the slightest, but like, even in my experience, it's very difficult to admit that you fell for their lies and for their manipulation. And like, I won't blame someone for that, really, you know? Anyways, that's my rambling. Thanks for not asking.
One thing I don't see people talking about with Ballerina Farms is their kids. Okay? Everybody's like noting, like, oh my gosh, this is so crazy. They don't have a nanny. They have all this money. Okay, well, for people who've left fundamentalist religious environments, this is not a shock at all. This makes sense that they have a bunch of kids and that she's expected to take care of all of the kids, okay? Everybody's talking about how this article that came out is pointing out all of the fucking toxicity in their the way that their life functions, okay? Because it looks very non-progress, okay? It looks very, very old school, where women are property and children are not looked at as human beings at all. And that's what's happening in the situation, is that when you have a bunch of children, they need to be taken care of, okay? This article, he pointed out, the husband pointed out, she is laid up in bed for a week or so at a time because she's so exhausted and sick and tired and depressed or whatever, can't get out of bed for a week. What does that do to children? And who does that leave to take care of the children if there's no nanny? If she's laid up in bed for a week, who is attending to these children? Okay? And it's not like these kids are teenagers. Even if they were, that would not be great. Even if they were, okay? They're all very little kids. She has been popping them out one after the other, okay? She had her last child, and then postpartum break was to go perform in a beauty pageant or compete, whatever you want to call it. Okay, that's not most women's idea of a postpartum experience. Okay, and like also while portraying this whole like we're natural, back to the land, we're like on the farm, like, okay, no animal is going to do crazy hard work after giving birth. Like, this doesn't even make sense with nature, okay? Women shouldn't be giving birth and then going to work, okay? So it's really interesting that they want to mix this traditional lifestyle with one where she's also a boss babe and making huge power business moves at the same time as having to raise her children. It is not possible. It's not possible, okay? She's not only doing all of this, but performing homemaking meals on Instagram on a regular basis. Sorry, I had to come outside because the drumming started. The idea that the kids are being overlooked in this situation is honestly the scariest part, because most of us who have left religion were the kids in these situations. You know, from really big families, a lot of us had lots and lots of brothers and sisters. A lot of us were neglected as kids in lots of different ways. A lot of us were abused as kids in a lot of different ways. A lot of that came from parents not watching us, or us being parentified or being watched by other kids, us being left alone in religious environments where our parents were not watching and they trusted everybody around us. A lot of us were not being attended to when it came to our own health, when it came to food that we were consuming or not consuming. And also, America as a whole has a really big problem with seeing like wealthy people as being above abuse or child neglect. And it's like, just because you have money to do it doesn't mean that you're doing it. Okay, and clearly we can already see they have money to have help with the kids. They have money to hire help to help her with their entire life, and yet they're not doing it. So that just alone should tell people, like, if this is how little amount he cares about his wife, who he's benefiting from, how well is he treating his children, who he's not getting any benefit from, who are they're just, once they're out, they're just a kid in the house that has to be fed, who is crying, who has to be taken care of. And it's like, kids aren't just feeding and bathing and clothing and then sending them out into the world, and we should know that by now. So the idea of having a bunch of kids, it's not necessarily about how much money you have. It's a lot about the mental health capacity that you have, the physical health capacity that you have. And when a Juilliard-trained ballerina, aka like a top-tier athlete in our country, is burnt out and exhausted from living a life that arguably a lot of women have been watching and being super jealous of the whole time because they assumed she had help, she can't get out of bed because of all the work that she's doing, which is arguably more work than like the average fucking boss babe going to an office is doing. And she makes it look, it's like an entire performance. That's not her choice. That's the brand. That is the brand. And that is the problem I'm seeing with this, like, all of these influencers that are connected to religious entities. Even if you're not, obviously we've gone far enough into 2024 where the conversation of exploiting your children online is not great. It's toxic, it's bad. But the fact that a lot of religious organizations are the ones prompting these mothers to do it so that they can financially benefit off of it is not surprising.